Welcome to episode 37 of Real Health Radio. You can find all the links that are talked about as part of this episode in the show notes at www.7, so seven health.com/37.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another installment of Real Health Radio. This is going to be another show where I'm doing it solo, and the topic for today is all about setting up and running a successful practice. And I remember when I was first studying nutrition, I was told that it was such a hot topic now, and this was back in 2006, I believe, and that once I'd finished, people would be beating a path to my door just to be looking for advice, and it was really suggested that it was just going to be so easy. You'd be setting up a practice and clients would just be like rolling in, and I can categorically tell you that that is not the case. Setting up and running a nutrition practice has been an absolutely monumental effort and something that I continue to work on each and every day. And honestly, I can't think of anything in my life that has taken this amount of commitment and this amount of effort to set up and run properly. So what I want to do as part of the podcast today is I want to share my thoughts about setting up and running a successful practice and some of the things that I think are most important and also I found most helpful. And a lot of the show is going to be kind of like a memoir as I share my story to help illustrate things. And I don't want to give the impression that I've got all this stuff figured out, because I definitely don't, and I'm constantly learning more and more. But hopefully you can benefit from hearing what I've been through and from some of the advice. So to start with, I studied at the College of Naturopathic Medicine, known as CNM, in London. And at the start, I was looking around at different places to get started and to study. And I looked at CNM and I really liked what was on offer. At that stage, I was just getting into learning about health and about food, and I was very much into doing things naturally in inverted commas in a naturopathic way, etc. And so I think that was part of the reason why this course really appealed to me. I did consider studying as a dietitian, but at the time I thought that dietitians really only worked in a hospital setting, and I knew that that was not what I wanted to do, that I wanted to work in private practice. So that kind of ruled that out for me, even though I now know that that's not necessarily the case and that you can be a dietitian and work in private practice. With CNM, the course was also offered on weekends. So I could study on the weekends and I could still keep up my full-time job. And I think that part of it also suited me because I wasn't in a position to just give up my full-time role and study full-time. And look, what I would add to this is there is no perfect program, and so much of what you learn when you study is just like the beginning points, and it just gives you enough, and then after that you do more and more study. And I know that I've learned way more since I've stopped studying or stopped formally studying in terms of doing that program. And also a lot of the stuff that I learned from the College of Naturopathic Medicine, I don't use anymore. And that doesn't mean that it was wrong or they shouldn't be shown it. It's just not the way that I practice. So I think it is important for people to remember that, yes, you want to pick the best fit place to go, but also be aware that this isn't going to be the only thing that you ever study. And after that, you can just forget about it. It really is just going to be a starting point. So I studied from 2006 to 2008, and I handed everything in, my final bits and pieces, in the end of 2008. So I think I was officially qualified in about October of 2008. And honestly, when I finished up, I felt like I didn't know very much. I felt pretty scared. I felt a lot like a fraud. I felt like I'm going to be found out. And so if you are studying or you've just finished studying and this is how you feel, I would say that it is completely normal. And when I've then spoken to other nutritionists, when I've spoken to other dietitians, basically anyone within this health field, most of the time when someone just finishes up their initial studies, they feel like this because there is just such an overwhelming amount of information that you're trying to absorb and digest and learn about, but also how to then explain that to someone else, how to work out what's going on with someone and be able to come up with a plan that really suits them. So I think this is a very natural feeling that a lot of people have, and the only way to get over it is just by seeing more and more clients. And I would say for me, it probably took a couple of years to get through that, and now where I'm in a position where I feel just much more comfortable about this stuff. And as part of the program, so as part of CNM, there was, I think it was 200 or 400 clinical hours as part of it. So I think that side of things really helped. So I was going into lots of consultations with people and I was getting a lot of practice in that area. But it is really just a small amount in the whole scheme of things, and it just takes time to get more and more experience and feel more comfortable. So probably for the first 6 months after I finished studying, I didn't really do that much with it, and I was searching around for a place that I could practice out of. So it was probably in the early to middle part of 2009, I started practicing where I'd found a place in West London to practice out of. And at this stage, it was very small. So I'd be maybe seeing 1 or 2 clients a month, and that was kind of it. And at that point, I was also still doing a full-time job, and I was doing a full-time job that was crammed into 4 days, so I could then have that 1 day off a week to do consultations. And it was around this time as well, so probably late 2009, early 2010, that I set up my website. And I mean, today it is so easy to set up a website. So you can use things like Squarespace or Wix or Weebly or any of those things. And all those sites now, when you set them up on those different platforms, they look beautiful. They look amazing, and they function like a very normal website. Whereas back in 2009, like, this definitely wasn't the case. And I'm very envious of how easy it is today for people to get started, because it wasn't the case when I was trying to do this back then. And I'm lucky, though, my brother runs an IT company, so he was very invaluable with helping me get all the things set up, and he's been so helpful over the years. But personally, over the years, I've learned how to do more and more of this stuff, and I definitely can't code, but I can start to understand where things are going wrong and different plugins and all of that, and so I've got a lot better with it. And so it was then in about the middle of 2010 that I started writing a blog that was then attached to my website. And previously my site would have like a static homepage, and then there was a blog attached, and now it's been changed over so that the whole thing is sort of like a blog. And this is probably one of the big bits of information or big bit of advice that I would give you. And it is like, start putting out content. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a blog, although I think it's a really good starting place. But start writing, start doing videos, start doing a podcast, whatever it may be. And I would say, I mean, writing, again, I think it is probably the easier place for a lot of people to start. And be compassionate with yourself when you're starting out, because the stuff that you start with is probably going to be pretty generic. You just don't have the experience to be talking much more than this kind of stuff. And I would say also for a lot of people, they might not be so experienced with doing writing. And I know at the time for me, I didn't have to do a lot of like writing in terms of creative writing or explaining things more than writing emails for my everyday job. And so I didn't think of myself as much of a writer, and it was really quite tough for me to start with. And it just took lots of writing to get better at it. And so I've now been doing this for the last, 5 or 6 years I've been writing for. And it is still something that is a work in progress, and it's something that I do take very seriously. I used to at this stage read really like health books was the main focus, and now I read a lot more fiction, which I do for entertainment, but also to help me become a better writer. So I read a lot of books to learn how to be better at writing, whether that be books specifically explaining that skill. So there's a book by Stephen King called On Writing, which is a part memoir, part book about how to write, how he writes, etc., which I found really, really useful. Tim Ferriss has had a couple of podcasts where he's interviewed different writers, and they've talked about their methods, etc., which I found to be very helpful. But yeah, I focus a lot on this and how I can develop that skill. But really, the most important part, and nothing can really touch this, is you just need to be taking action, and you just need to be writing more. And the more that you write, the better you get with time. And so I went from a situation where I was just writing for my own blog to then over the years starting to write for different blogs. And so I think Matt Stone's 180 Degree Health was one of the first ones I was writing for. I then started writing for Frame, Rethink Central for a while, Your Zen Life, and now starting to write different pieces for Ravishly as well. In terms of like the reading, and I mentioned about like my reading, this is something that was really slow to take off for me. When I was at college studying nutrition, I think there was probably like 1 or 2 or 3 books that I read that whole 3 years outside of the textbooks we were given. And so I didn't have a huge amount of reading. It wasn't something, I've never been much of a reader through my teenage years or my early 20s or anything along those lines. And so it was probably around about 2009, 2010 that this really started to change. And I really started to put a focus on reading more, and started to really fall in love with reading and getting different books. And probably from about 2009 or 2010 on, I'd say I've read between like 30 and 40 books a year. I also started to get into other blogs around that same time, and was then constantly reading different health blogs. And I would say that, again, like initially it started out being very much nutrition and very much health focused, and that now has become much broader. And I try and take much more disparate ideas and bring them together so I can better understand the human condition, why people do the things they do, or really anything that I think can be relevant to help clients. So whether it be I read this book and there's this really good anecdote, and I think it starts to explain why this is going on here, or whatever it may be. And especially when you're starting out, it is really important to be just taking in more and more information about the human body, about different things relating to health. And I would encourage people to read fairly widely around this stuff, because in the beginning it can be very easy to find a couple of books that then support your original leanings or your way of thinking, and then just read more in that one direction, and you almost build your wealth of knowledge around a very specific framework or a very specific way of thinking. But as time's gone on, and I know for me, I've changed a lot of my beliefs and I've changed a lot of my opinions on things, and I talk about things in a very different way now than I did 3, 4, 5 years ago. And that's come because I've made the decision of I'm going to read things that go against what I necessarily think and see how my beliefs then stack up after I've read that stuff. So reading widely, whether we're talking about widely within like health and nutrition or widely in terms of everything, I think is a really important thing to do. I then started a supper club at some point in 2010. And so a supper club is, if for anyone who doesn't know, is where people come into your home and you cook food for them. And I, at the time, was living in a converted church, and we had the penthouse of that church was me and 2 mates, and it was just an obscene, beautiful building, absolutely massive. We could fit a table in there that would sit like 20 people in our living room. And so I set it up with a chef, and he'd do all the cooking, and the point would be that we'd have a 5-course meal, and I'd talk through each of the courses about the foods we've used, etc. And it was a really good experience, and I was very nervous when I set it up because I didn't like public speaking. I was very shy in terms of getting up in front of a group of people and talking about really anything, but even talking about nutrition was something I really struggled with. So I didn't end up picking up a huge amount of clients from doing the supper clubs, although I did definitely get some different contacts. But through doing that for probably a year or 18 months, I can't remember exactly how long we did them for, it meant that I became very comfortable talking in front of people. And I went from something that I really hate to something I don't find so bad anymore and actually quite enjoy doing. And within this line of work, I think it really does pay to be someone who's comfortable talking in front of a group of people, and it's a good way of building up clients. So even if you're someone who's like, no, I don't want to do it, it's like a really big fear of mine, I would say find a way to put yourself out there, even if it starts out small, even if it's friends, whatever it is. Because in the same way as the writing, talking in front of people is only scary or overwhelming or whatever because most people don't do it very regularly. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. So definitely start to find ways to put yourself out there, and start with stuff that's really simple. So pick a topic that you know a lot about, research that topic, and then just start there. And so then in March 2011, my full-time job in effect made me redundant. I was a contractor, and I'd been contracting there for, I don't know, I think probably 3 years. And they were then not going to renew the contract. And so I saw this then as an opportunity to finally start doing nutrition full time, because at this stage I'd only been doing it really one day a week where I'd have that day off, and then in the evening times. And at that stage, I decided to find a new location to practice out of. The place in West London I'd previously been using, I wasn't particularly happy with. So I moved over to a practice in London Bridge and started using one of the Neil's Yard rooms over there. And it was kind of like starting over. And so I didn't have a huge amount of contacts. I didn't know many people over that way. So I was starting out probably having 1 or 2 clients a month. And then maybe over the space of about a year, this built up to having 2 or 3 clients a week, and then kind of built from there. And I mean, prior to quitting my job or being made redundant, I had only saved a little bit of money, and this quickly ran out. And this was, I mean, really stupid on my part. And if I could do it over again, I would definitely change this thing. And I'm very lucky that I had some parents who could bail me out a couple of times when I couldn't be able to pay my rent. But it was a really, really stressful time that probably went on for about a year, 18 months. And within about 3 or 4 months of quitting my job, it became very apparent that I wasn't going to be able to support myself just doing the nutrition thing full time at that stage. And so started looking for different part-time work again. And I was pretty much up for doing anything. I don't have any ideas of like, this is beneath me, I should be better than this. I was like, I need money and I'm just going to work. So I helped out at an estate agent on weekends. I did like temp cover work on receptions. I would got involved with certain agencies, and I would go and hand out different samples of products in supermarkets or on the street. I eventually started then working part-time for an online music website. And this then became like my stable part-time job. And I ended up doing that for about 18 months and finished up there a bit over 3 years ago. And while I was there, I was working about 25 hours a week for them while doing sort of everything else around that. And I would say, like, for those years, I was working really, really long hours, and in a lot of ways had very little money to show for it. But I really do think that that's, for most people, what it's like running a business when you start out. And people can't really be afraid of hard work. Like, to make this work, you do need to put in the hours, and there just isn't really any way around that, especially to start out. And so after probably about 18 months of doing the nutrition thing full time with just the one location in London Bridge, I then took on a second location in Goode Street, also in London. And this new location actually worked out really well for me. The two guys that ran it were amazing. They were very good at referring me clients, which the first place in London Bridge were terrible at. I think in the 3 years or so that I was there, I maybe picked up one or two clients from them the whole time. So moving to that practice, or starting to use the practice at Goode Street as well, was really helpful on that side. It was then at some point in 2013 that I changed from doing one-off consults to doing packages only. And so what I mean by that is, originally I used to say my hourly rate is this, you can book in for a consult, and then I'd see them, and then I'd say at the end of that, let's catch up again in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then at the end of the next consult I'd do the same, etc. And it was a really tough slog, and I think it was a tough slog because I never knew when people would sign up again, if they were going to sign up again. If things worked really well to start with, people within 2 or 3 consults like, it's fine, I don't need to see you anymore, even though most of the time they were only just starting to get better. Or things had started a little slowly to improve, and they're like, I don't want to do this anymore, it's too hard. Or people would genuinely be getting good results and I was working for them, but then they had to move house, or something happened with their work, or whatever it may be, and it then just stopped being a priority. And so what it meant was I wanted to be in a situation where I didn't work with people in that real sporadic manner. I wanted to work with them for a solid amount of time, where I knew that I had this amount of time to help them to get better, that they were going to commit to it. And so I changed over to really doing only packages. And it started out that I had a package for 3 months, or I had a package for 6 months. And then after a little while of doing that, I just morphed it into the only package is for 5 months, which just seemed like a good amount of time to be able to get results with people. And if I need to work with someone for longer than that, and I'm happy to do it, and we can then just do it on a consult by consult basis after that point. But it meant that there was going to be that sign up of 5 months to start with, and that really helped. And it helped for a number of different reasons. So like, first, it meant that I could get really good results with people, because I would be seeing them every 2 weeks. I would see them for an hour. We'd be able to go through so much more, and there was that commitment. And it's amazing. If I don't see someone for 4 weeks, they do less in that 4 weeks than if I see them every 2 weeks. And just having that consistency and that consult rolling around every 2 weeks keeps people on point and keeps them doing what they should be doing. And so it definitely helped in terms of compliance and getting people to follow through, but also then helped with them getting results. It helped for me when I would get testimonials from people, because whereas before, there was no natural end to things, and I'd then suddenly have someone drop off the face of the earth and then like 2 months later go, hey, do you want to do a testimonial? Whereas this way round, I would be then finishing up with someone, we'd know when the finish date was, and then I'd be able to say, you know what, it's been really great working with you. You've put in a whole heap of work on this. You've got much better. Would you be able to write a testimonial for me? And that really helped. And also from a financial perspective, just knowing that when I signed someone up, that they would then be paying, and I would be having that direct debit where the money was coming out, or they'd be paying the lump sum up front, etc., really helped, so that I knew what I would be having this month and next month, etc., which is really important when you're trying to run a business. And so I started doing those packages in 2013. I think it was probably the middle of 2013. And from 2014, when I took on a whole load of people in the January time in 2014, I got to the stage where I filled up my practice. And then from that point on, I've been in a situation where I open up my practice twice a year. So once at the beginning of the year, once in the middle of the year, and that's when I'll take on clients. And during that time, I'll aim to take on 15, 16, something like that is normally a pretty good number for me to be working with, considering I normally have some clients from the previous time and everything else that I have to do. And so that means that when I take on that many people, when it's full, I just close off again and then set up a wait list So people want to work with me and I'm closed, they then just go on the waiting list. So then the next time that I open up, they're the first people that I get in contact with. And a lot of those new clients that I take on are then people who've been on my wait list. So yeah, it's been a really good way of me making it work as a business, but also making it work in terms of people getting much better results. And it was probably then from about the middle of 2014 when I then started taking on the second round of clients in 2014 that I then started doing everything via Skype. And there was a couple of reasons for this. I'd moved out of London, so getting to the two London practices that I go from or work out of was now more of an issue, because I was out in the country. To take me an hour just to get into London and then traveling across. But more than that was more of my clients were now international, so I'd have to be doing the consult via Skype anyway. And more of my London clients were just becoming too busy, and they're like, can we just do it via Skype? So I'd go into London, go into a practice, I'd see one person in real life, I'd then see the rest of the people via Skype, and I was then paying all this money to rent out the room and to rent out the practice. I was like, this just doesn't make sense. And so at that stage, I then just started doing everything online and doing it via Skype, which actually works out much better. And the reason it works out much better as well is because when I had a practice, it would be like, there are these specific hours in the afternoon that you can come in. So you've got to be there between, 4 and 9 at night. That person would have to travel there. Whereas now I've set it up where I have 2 client days a week, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And I will see someone at 7 o'clock in the morning if I need to, and I'll see someone at 8 o'clock at night if I need to, and then everything in between. And so this means that there's way more hours that someone can actually see me over those days. And so it works better for them. They're not having to travel. It works better for me. I'm not having travel. And now I'm at the point where I would say somewhere around about 70% of my clients aren't either in London or aren't in the UK. And so it just makes much more sense for me to be doing everything online. Through this process, I would say that learning to say no to potential clients becomes really important. And I know in the beginning this can be really difficult because you're just wanting to work with really anyone. You need the money, you're wanting to take on clients, you haven't developed a niche, you don't know necessarily what your limitations are, what you can achieve with someone. So the temptation is to be like, yep, I can do that. Yep, I can help you with that. Whereas now I've been doing this for long enough, and also I'm aware I'm going to have to work with someone for 5 months, that I'm very upfront with someone when I chat with them. And before working with someone, I'll have a conversation for anywhere from half an hour to an hour, just going through, okay, what is everything that's going on with you? What are the things that you've tried before? What's your history like in terms of dieting, etc.? What are the things that you want to get out from working with me? Like, what would you be happy to have seen happen once we finish up working together, and what are you expecting to achieve? So I know everything about them, and then I'm able to say to them, like, yes, I can do all of that, or you know what, I can't do these things, and the reason I can't do these things are because of this and this and this. And it's also, if you look at it from this angle, etc. And I'm very upfront with someone, because as I said, I don't want to work with someone for 5 months if I know that what they're wanting to achieve isn't really doable for me. And so I don't offer people weight loss. I'm very upfront with, like, if weight comes off while working together, then that's great, but I can't guarantee that's going to happen. I don't work with vegetarians or vegans. It's not that I have anything against that way of eating or that way of life. I just find that if I'm working with someone, it feels a little like one hand's tied behind my back. So there'll be times where I'm like, I think it would be really helpful for you to be having more animal protein, but I can't then make that recommendation. So I've just personally decided I don't want to work with those people. There's going to be someone who is better at working with you if you want to pursue that lifestyle than I am. So you need to find that person. And it's not me saying you have to change, you have to stop being a vegetarian or vegan. That's not the point. It's just I'm not the right person for you to work with if that's the case. And so getting to the point where you can be really upfront with people even if it means you're going to lose them as a client, and being okay with that. Because I think that's much better than working with someone and thinking, you know what, I hope I can sort this out. I hope I can wing this. Over the time that I've worked with people, I'd say that my client makeup has shifted. So previously when I started out, it was nearly always women who were in their late 20s and early 30s. It's still mostly women. I'd say women make up probably like 95% of my clients, but the age range is much wider now. So it's pretty much anyone in their early 20s through to people in their 60s. And so there isn't just this very narrow bracket of like of 10 years that I'm working between with people. It's much broader now. And I would also add, I've really started to find through this, and it's taken years for this to happen, but really find my identity and who I wanted to speak to and what I wanted to be about. And I think this is something that is very important to work out for yourself. And it might not be something you can work out immediately just as you're setting up your practice. It might be something that just has to happen naturally by seeing lots of people, and over the space of a year or two, seeing the things that you find more interesting or the clients that you get a better results with or whatever it may be. And so in a lot of ways, for me, where I've ended up has been a little bit by chance, because in the beginning, like more and more of the women who were showing up in my practice really didn't like their body. They were really struggling with it. They very much wanted to lose weight. And I'd be looking at them and there was nothing of them to lose. They were already very slim. Most people would look at them and be wanting to trade bodies with them. And so I started to realize that a lot of what I needed to be advising them on, it wasn't about food and nutrition. It was looking at, okay, self-compassion, how to have body acceptance, all of those sort of things, and was reading more then about Health at Every Size, The Obesity Myth by Paul Campos, Perfect Girls and Starving Daughters by Courtney E. Martin. Really started to shift my opinion when I was reading that stuff. I discovered Matt Stone's stuff, and I'd say Matt Stone has been a huge influence on me. I got more into Ray Peat's work, but I started to really understand what Ray Peat was about. It wasn't just about that everyone should eat lots of ice cream and not have any fish oils, that it was much deeper than that, and really understanding metabolism. And I would say as well, just drawing on my own experience through eating and my weight. I mean, I'm someone who really, regardless of what I do, regardless of what I eat, my weight pretty much stays in the same bracket. I mean, my weight's now heavier now since I stopped doing lots of marathons and triathlons, but in the whole scheme of things, we're talking about a pretty insignificant jump up. And so I started to see that the whole weight loss idea was not as simple as it was cracked up to be. Because if I was in a situation where I couldn't put on weight regardless of how much I tried, I believe that the same thing was also true of people trying to lose weight. And just starting to see as well that people were both healthy and unhealthy all across the weight spectrum. And so all of these things had a real impact on me and my identity in terms of my brand and what I wanted to be about. And this is the stuff that I then very much write about, and when I'm creating content, think about. And one of the things that I read, which I often keep in mind, is when you're writing, when you're creating content, is have someone in mind, have an avatar that you're writing for, and understand where are people's different pain points or what are certain things that are important to people, and be keeping that in mind when you're writing. And that's definitely something I keep in mind. Another suggestion would be to really niche down and to find your niche and find who you want to be talking to and talking about and focusing on in terms of, I'm going to be doing this kind of area or specialty. And I mean, I don't follow my own advice on this thing. And I haven't really niched down. I obviously have certain things I talk about, but I really do work with a real wide range of clients and a real wide range of conditions. And And I know that that's to my detriment in terms of it's been tougher to then get traction. I don't have like a nice little one-liner that I can describe myself by. But I also think that for me personally, this is going to pay off long term because I know what I'm trying to do and what I'm about. But I also know that if I was seeing the same client day in and day out, and it was always just the one thing, that I would go out of my mind and be bored with it. And so I need to be keeping in mind like my own enjoyment and my own sanity. And so even if it means in the short term it affects me from a financial perspective, or it's not as easy to take on clients because I cover so many different areas, then I've become okay with that, and I'm happy to do it. Use your own network. Speak to friends and see if they have any connections or people they can put you in contact with. And I know this for me has been really helpful. Like, for example, I started working with Frame probably about 3.5 years ago, somewhere around that. And that connection came about from a friend. I was having a chat, I think it was a New Year's Eve party, having a chat with a friend. He's like, oh, you should have a chat with this person. I'm going to introduce the both of you. And so I was then introduced to Pip from Frame. We had a chat. I offered her a free consult and just to show her I knew what I was talking about, and then started writing for them. And another friend, he works for Thomson Reuters, and he spoke to their HR department, someone in the HR, and about me coming in and giving a talk, and that then turned into me going in and giving 5 talks to them over the space of a year and picking up numerous clients off the back of it. So look, maybe I'm really lucky with the friends that I have, but I think most people will have some friends that can help them out in some way. And it might not be directly in terms of you getting business, but it might be, oh, I've got this person who's really good as a graphic designer, or I've got this person who's really good that could help with some other aspect of your business, whether it be, oh, they're great with doing Facebook advertising or whatever it may be. And this has obviously become much, much easier because you can just put something up on Facebook, i.e., I'm needing some help with this. Does anyone have a recommendation? But yeah, having friends help you out, and not in a really slimy way and constantly pestering people, but it just comes about very naturally from chatting to them. So yeah, that would be something I would suggest. So then kind of fast forward a couple of years, I started this podcast. It was in the second half of last year. I can't remember when the first one went out. It was probably like August, September time. It had been something I'd been thinking about doing for quite a while. They talk about there's a thing called the serial effect, and this is very true for me. I was pretty late in getting into listening to podcasts, but at some point during last year, I listened to the podcast Serial, which is amazing. If you've never listened to it before, I highly recommend it. And it was what got me into listening to podcasts and then starting to think a little bit more seriously about, you know what, this could be something that would be a really good medium. I then had a chat with Maddie Moon, and she was really encouraging, and she was talking about how helpful it had been for her. She invited me on the show, and from that I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this, and then eventually set up my own podcast. And it really helps because it gives me a different angle to talk about things. So you've got a certain level of attention span when you're writing an article. Whereas with a podcast, I can be in a situation where I can create some content that goes on for half an hour, and you can still have someone listen to that whole thing through. So it meant that I could go into much more detail. I could do things in long form. And it's, I would say, probably one of the best things that I've ever done. I was very specific when I started out that I was going to do one show where it was me and then one show where it was a guest, because I didn't want it to be just me being an interviewer. I wanted to show that I was knowledgeable, that I understand a lot of different aspects of health, and health in a very broad sense. And I wanted to be able to then cover those topics, and where it's just me delivering that. And so that's been my focus and my game plan the whole time since I've started out. And if you look at all of the episodes, it just goes 1-to-1. So one will be a guest, one will be me on my own. And it is still a work in progress. And it's me getting more comfortable with this and trying to work out how to be a better interviewer and how to ask better quality questions. and also how to be better at explaining things. And I listen back to some of my early podcast shows, both when I'm interviewing guests and when I was on my own. I noticed I'd have certain verbal tics. I would say kind of and sort of a lot of the time. And I've been very conscious of getting better with that and erasing it. And it probably still happens, but it's nowhere near as to the degree that it was before. The podcast helped me make really good connections with people and reach out to them. And this is really important if you're doing everything online as I do. And it's something I wish I'd done years ago. I shouldn't have had to wait for me creating a podcast to start to push me out to start connecting with more people. And most of the people that I've gone and said, hi, I would love to have a chat, or I'd love to be in contact with you, I really love your work, they're more than happy to have a chat. And this is even before I say I'd love to have you as a guest on the podcast. They're more than happy to connect with me. And I know the same is if people send me an email and say, look, I would love to have a chat with you, or I'm just setting up a business or whatever, I'm always very good with giving people some time and saying, look, let's jump on for a Skype chat and I can give you little bits of advice. And this is a really hard profession in a lot of ways if you're trying to do everything on your own. So my advice is start to reach out to people, start to create your own little network of people that you can chat to and rely on, both for nutritional information, but also just for ideas about how to run a business, how to do certain things with marketing, what autoresponder do you use, or just the things that I now in a lot of ways take for granted, but I know are so difficult when you're starting out because you just don't know any of this stuff. But I would also add, the podcast is a huge undertaking in terms of time. And each episode will take me a minimum of 5 hours, anywhere up to 15 or 20 hours to put together. And there will be weeks where I will spend 2 solid days just writing and fact checking and putting everything together before I even start recording, and then have to edit and put it on Libsyn and all of that stuff. And so the feedback, and I'm really pleased I've done it because the feedback has been great. And so it feels very worthwhile. But it is a really big ask to come up with one of these each and every week. But I do really like the structure of doing it. And when I sent out my first 3 podcasts all at once, I said that I was going to do a podcast every Thursday. And I'm now in a situation where I do a blog post every Monday or Tuesday. And I pretty much always keep to this format. There's probably been a couple of times where I've missed a podcast, once because my girlfriend was in hospital, another time because I was away. But that's about it. And there'll be occasional times where I'll miss a blog post. But really, I've set up that structure and I've been I'm going to keep to this. And so I would say since implementing that, probably in the last year, I've published more content than I did in the previous 4 years. And it's much better quality content, and I just think having that structure rather than I'll write when I've got something to say and then there's 3, 4, 5 weeks between anything coming out, or I'll do a podcast when I'm ready or when I get round to it. I'm no, I'm going to do this every single week, and it really does pay off. I would also say, probably slightly detrimentally, it also impacts on me being able to create programs, because I now give out so much information each week, whether it be as part of the podcast, whether it be information as part of that I've pulled from an old program, or ideas that I was going to put towards a new program. But again, in the short term, I think this can impact on my finances, but long term, I really think it will pay off. And I really do focus on the long game. And I know where I want to end up. I know the stuff that I want to be doing. And it's just working at that each and every day to make it happen. And at some point this year, I'm going to start doing some videos. That's the next thing on my radar of things that I want to be doing, or ways to be creating more content, where it will be short videos where they're 2 or 3 minutes long, as opposed to the articles or the podcast like this, which is just much, much longer, and just creating things for people who want to just have very short ideas. But that's just something I need to get my head around and start to work out when could I create the time to make that happen. Another thing I would also say is that you will always, when running a business, be fighting some kind of fire or some kind of issue pretty much all the time. So for a while, I was constantly having my site attacked and hacked, and I was having to get my brother to be helping out. We had to be like redoing everything. I had to redo the site. Like, it was a nightmare. There's times when my emails will suddenly start going on a blacklist for some reason, and I'm having to then get that sorted out. So my email's going through, and I'm having to send stuff out through a Gmail address, etc. And I mean, that stuff I just think is never ending, and it is just part and parcel of this stuff, that there will always be something going on, always something that you're having to deal with. So again, if you're in that situation and you feel like, why is this happening all the time? Why is it only me? It's not only you. It really does happen to pretty much everyone. Online marketing is definitely something I've spent a lot of time trying to look into and trying to figure out. And I would say probably a couple of years ago, I was going down this route much more, and I still continue to read on this stuff, but I think I've found a bit more of my identity and what I'm okay with and what I'm not okay with. And so I think previously there was very much this, if you just follow these templates, if you do this 5-step formula, just plug it in this way, these are the kinds of words you need to say, etc. This is what you should be doing, and this is what like the internet marketers were telling me to do. And my girlfriend would then be reading, and she's like, just so anti this stuff. And just like these emails, the way you're writing, it just doesn't sound like it came from you, and it's just really salesy. And I think in the beginning, I was like, look, I just really want to be bringing in clients. And now I've got to the point where I'm like, no, I don't want to be doing that. I want to feel like the stuff that I'm putting out is much more authentic. It is from my voice. And I'm now focusing more on like PR or using other connections or networking, to help in terms of like advertising and marketing, getting the word out, because that stuff feels more authentic and more genuine. And look, there is nothing wrong with using Facebook ads or Google AdWords or any of that stuff. And I've tried and will continue to use certain things like that at different points. But I would say, again, like, play the long game, like make sure that what you're putting out and how you're doing that lines up with who you are. And don't try and make like short-term sales where you then piss off or annoy a whole heap of people, that then can be at the detriment of your long-term likability and your long-term success. And I know I've probably been in some ways a little guilty of that over the years, and it's something I'm very like hyper aware of now, and how much I don't want to be going down that route. And I would also add with this, it's really important today, because there's just this real overwhelm of 1,000,001 things you can be doing. Like, there's a new social media thing coming out. Like, it feels like it's every month, and the temptation is like, I have to be doing that. I have to be now on Snapchat. I have to be on this one and that one, etc. And I don't necessarily believe that is the case. And maybe I'm wrong on this and people will disagree with me. But my sense is, find the things that work for you and become very good at doing them. So I focus primarily on email. I focus primarily on Facebook, doing a podcast, doing blog posts, and I don't do that much in terms of other social media. And again, this is something I want to work on and do want to get better at, but I also keep it in mind that if you're constantly putting out good content and you're doing that like week after week, it's going to be helping you. So don't feel that I need to be jumping to this thing and next thing and that thing constantly, because it just pulls you thin and keeps you in a situation where it's really difficult to be on top of things, and you just feel stretched. One thing I would say with that, though, is you do in a lot of ways want to be building up a mailing list through the work that you're doing, whether that be an audience on Facebook or other social media, or more importantly, from my perspective anyway, a mailing list where people have subscribed to something on your website. And again, you want to do this the right way. I think often the advice is, create something really simple that you could knock up really quickly, and then this really compelling headline just to get someone onto your list. And again, that stuff doesn't really sit that well with me. If someone's going to sign up and get onto my list, I want it to be because I provided really good content for them. And so most of the time, the three things that I have on my site that people can sign up for are an email series. And each of the email series are, I think, 4 or 5 days. Another one's 5 days, another one's like 10 or 12 days, and giving people really good information, because it's not just about getting someone to be on your list and then you're being able to bombard them with emails. It's about how can you be providing some really good information and content from that person so that when they get an email from you, they really want to be opening and reading that. So that's definitely something I've focused on, but knowing that in the long run, it is pretty important to be building up a list so that you have more reach when you're sending things out. What I would also just caution you with this, and with looking around at what other people are doing and other websites, is beware of comparison. Because it can be a really big time suck where you start looking at someone else's site and be like, oh, I really like the way they've done that. I wish I was able to do that on my site. Or let's have a look what they charge, or let's have a look at what programs they have. And wow, why doesn't my program sell as well as theirs? Or God, I wish I could be taking more clients, etc. And really, for most people, you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know how many clients that person has. You don't know how many people signed up for their online program, etc. And the temptation is to get sucked into believing that everyone is doing better than you, and that you're really missing out, and that why is it so difficult for me, but everyone else seems to be successful. And that's just definitely not the case. And I would just say, I mean, running a business, as I said at the beginning, and running this practice, it is really tough. And this has been a very big endeavor, and has been a very big thing that I've done in my life, and it has taken up my life. And from my graduating year at C&M, I don't know anyone else who is doing what I am doing and able to do this in a full-time way as their sole income. And that's out of, I don't know how many people in the class, 100 people in the class. And there may be a couple that I'm unaware of who are doing it, but pretty much no one who qualified back then is able to do this and do it full time. So just being aware of that, because for every, I don't know, person you see online on Facebook who has 200,000 fans or 20,000 fans or whatever it may be, or people you hear about who've got a mailing list of 100,000 or 250,000 or whatever it may be, there are literally thousands and thousands of other people who are struggling to just make it work. And don't be like suckered into believing that it's easy and that everyone is making 6 and 7 figures and that's the way it should be. And obviously you're just doing it wrong. And if you can just sign up to this online course, it's going to tell you how to do all that stuff, because it really isn't that easy. And there is no shortcuts to just putting in a huge amount of work. And look, I've got better now at creating more of a work-life balance, but in the beginning, this was not an option. And it was hard work, and it was a lot of hours, and it was a real steep learning curve. And I honestly don't think that there's any other way around it. Like, I know people talk about the 80-20 principle and Pareto's principle in terms of like find the things that give you the 80% of results for the 20% of the inputs, and that is great. But to get to that stage where you can work out what stuff creates that, you need to put in the work and understand all the different aspects. And so just realize that if you've been doing this for a year or 2 years or 3 years, like, it does get better, but it does take that long for it to really start to take off. And so probably to be expecting for the first 3 to 4 years that you are going to be working almost endlessly. And I used to work lots of weekends. I used to work late nights. So it was just, in a sense, constant work. And I'm now much lucky to be at a stage where I don't have to be pushing like that or like I was before, but I also made a conscious choice to not push in that way because I didn't think it was sustainable for me long term, and I wanted to have a life outside of just working all the time. And I'd say it's probably also been that my goals have shifted somewhat, and realizing like what I'm prepared to do to achieve what I want to achieve, and realizing that I don't have to be earning huge amounts of money, and that money isn't going to change everything, and that I want to have a work-life balance. I want to be enjoying my day-to-day living, not the thought of I'm going to put in the next 10 or 15 years and then I can retire or whatever it may be. I want to enjoy my time now. And so I've just shifted the way that I work and what's important to me. But like, don't get me wrong, I still work a considerable amount every single week. So look, I think that's kind of it for what I wanted to cover as part of this show. If you are setting up or running a health business, let me know if you have any questions, and just put them in the show notes. So you can leave a comment on the page with the show notes. It's www.7, so SEVEN health.com/37. Or you can drop me an email directly. It's info@7-health.com, so SEVEN health.com. And I can then get back to you on that stuff. Next week's podcast, it's already ready, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you guys. So until then, have a great week.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7, SEVEN-health.com.